everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. Look what I'm wearing! Ah! Okay, if you have not been following the saga of this coat, this is the final installment of, I think at this point, 5 or 6 videos? There's a lot. I've been working on this coat for a while because it has been a challenge, let me tell you. Particularly all of this embroidery that you are seeing right here. But we are so close to finishing this coat, which is good because Comic-Con is in 4 days. I have 4 days to finish everything left on this coat. So let me tell you, I already did a tiny bit since the end of the last video. Again, if you haven't seen those videos, I will link those down below in a playlist so you can check them all out. But I did a tiny bit of work that I told you I was going to do at the end of the last video, which was I finished my closures slash fake closures. So there are 3 large hooks that are the actual closures for this, and then there are the 3 sets of decorative buttons right there. The other thing that I did that I don't know if you will notice if you saw that last video or not, because it's kind of a little hidden thing, but I think it's very important. Do you see how nicely this is laying now? That's because I did actually a running back stitch through basically from the underside of the facing under here, and then it went through the bottom side of the collar. So it went through a whole lot of layers, very thick, and just a running back stitch, looping to get all of this to lay nicely so that the collar itself kind of turns just a little bit to the inside. You don't get the facing turning to the outside, which is what was happening before. So that is all done now, and that means that the coat is hanging as it should because it wasn't hanging right before then. And so there are 2 things that I know now that I can next do, one of which I'm a little bit surprised at. If you remember from a few weeks ago, 2 to 3 weeks ago, when we were talking about shoulder width, shoulder pads, etc., what I wound up doing at that point was I did narrow my shoulders, but I also planned to use shoulder pads. And I even bought a set of shoulder pads. But you know what? Now that this collar is on, I don't need shoulder pads. Like, you can't see the shoulders. There's no need for them. So luckily that's one step that I don't have to do now. I do not have to sew these in, and actually I can put them right back in their little package and return them to Joann's, which is great. The other thing that I can now do is I can hem the coat. With it not hanging properly before, I just couldn't judge the length. So the coat right now, obviously you can't see the hem. I did show it to you a little bit in the last video, but it is very long in the back for some reason. It's much shorter in the front than it is in the back. So I need to even it all the way around. And then the exterior hem, the pink wool, is going to be hand hemmed so that you don't see like a line going through it. And the interior, the lining, is going to be hemmed separately, or at least that is my plan because that is how the original coat was done. I don't know that I love it, to be honest, but that's my plan at this moment. And it's going to be hemmed separately and probably done on machine because it's the inside. No one is going to see it anyway. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go take care of that and get that out of the way. And then tonight at rehearsal, kind of concurrently with that, I'm going to be working on the French knots for the cuff embroidery. That is this right here. I haven't done those French knots yet though. I will try to do a little tutorial for the French knots as well. So that will be coming very soon within this video. And they are surprisingly simple, even though they seem hard. Like, they were hard to get into at first, and then you kind of get it going in a pattern and they become actually very simple. So yeah, I have to do a whole bunch of French knots on here and do the hem, and that is my goal for tonight, to get all of those done, because that means that I can then put the cuffs on. And I think at that point, I think that's going to be the last thing, is once the hem is done, it's to add the cuffs. So that will be great. I'm very much looking forward to it. So I got the corner part of this facing pinned in place and all sandwiched in there. I did try to cut away kind of what was folded inside so it would be thinner. But speaking of thinner, I'm having a little bit of an issue here because I just can't turn this twice. It is so so thick. So I have two options here. One, I could put bias tape as like almost a little facing of the facing all the way around this edge, and that way I could just stitch down the bias tape, and bias tape is nice and thin, and so it really won't take up extra bulk here. Or the other option is to actually use the lining as what covers up the edge. So basically that would mean turning the edge of the lining like that and stitching that down like that, so that it goes through and probably takes a little bite of the exterior, because this lining is not enough to like keep this in place. But what I'm worried about is when you do that, whenever you do lining, there's always like the what if the lining is, you know, shifted or just in some ways not quite right. That's always a possibility. So yeah, to be honest, I'm not positive what I'm going to do, but let's go talk about French knots instead. All right, we're going to try to do a little French knot tutorial here. So I have my thread already anchored from these previous French knots, but if you're starting new, you can just do like a knot at the end basically, and you are going to take your thread and put it up through the fabric. Then you are going to hold that thread taut with your left hand if you're right-handed, and you are going to take your needle and wrap that thread around twice on your needle like that. Then you are going to take your needle and put it back through the fabric a little bit away from where you first put it through. Now, because my spots are close together, I am just going to bring that right over to the next dot right there, still keeping this taut right there. And while still holding that taut, I am going to gently slide my needle through there. Now I say gently because this is pretty open weave fabric, and so a lot of times it wants to pull the knot through the fabric, which you don't want, obviously. So you want to keep it nice and taut and just let it close down right there. And see, we've got a really nice French knot right there. And now we are all prepped to do our next French knot here. You can also just pull your needle to the back as well, especially like if you're going to be finishing it off, you would just pull your needle to the back, or if you wanted to like knot on the back to secure it. I've been doing that every 6 or 7 or so of these French knots. But otherwise you would just go right up through the fabric again. And I'm using the full 6 thread strand, so you can see it's kind of separating there, which I don't love. The separation can lead to kind of separation as you do your knot. And like that, all of my French knots are done. And so that means that the cuffs are ready to be put together. Before I add the bias tape to this hem, I do want to show you what it looks like that I've cut away in here, because I've cut away quite a bit. So you can see that I cut away some of the length here folded up from the facing, and same with over here across the little strip. And then I've kind of veered it up so that it's back to normal before we get to the edge of the facing. I've also cut away the lining that was in there as well. So you can see I just kind of cut it. I may cut more of that, to be honest, but this is so thin that it shouldn't make much of a difference anyway. But yeah, lots of cutaway there. Now I'm going to add the bias tape to here, fold everything up, and stitch that down. So I'm trying to figure out right now how to do the cuffs with the least amount of bulk, because this fabric is so freaking thick. So what I think I'm actually going to do is I am going to cut this a 1/2 inch shorter so that it is literally the length of what I want it finished, because I had a 1/2 inch seam allowance on here. And then I think I'm going to take my fold line here, because part of this cuff should be on the inside, like you can see on screen right here in this little zoomed in picture. And so if I take this fold line and I fold it like this and put the raw edge of that in the base of that fold so that it comes like to the edge, and this just literally wraps around, and then it's going to have the lining stitched down on top of the top ½ inch of this, and the other side of this is actually going to get cut quite short, and it's kind of just going to like float in there. I think that will work, maybe with some tacks on there. Obviously it's a lot of hand sewing, but I think that will be the best way to minimize the bulk of all of this. So this is only pinned in place right now, but this honestly feels so not bulky. I don't know why I don't make other cuffs like this. So I think I basically described to you earlier what I did with one slight change. So this is left the length that I had originally cut it, which was intended to have like a 1 inch overlap kind of on the inside with the lining coming to right here. And I will get to the lining later. But I actually wound up cutting off 1.5 inches of the length of the inside of the cuff so that that could butt right up to that fold, just like the sleeve. So both of those are just tucked in and go right up to this fold right here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of do big sort of like whip basting stitches along this edge, catching through all but the most exterior layer here. And then I'm going to go back around with the lining that is hiding way in here, but with the lining in there, and I'm going to sew the lining in place with nice small whip stitches so that all of this part in here is hidden. And yes, it's all hand sewing, but it's not very much. It's just the bottom of a cuff, so it shouldn't be too bad. And this is what that looks like when it is all done. So you can see the lining coming over the folded part of the cuff there with the little whip stitches holding that in place. So that's a nice clean edge, and it's really not too thick, which is kind of amazing considering how thick this wool is and how many layers we're talking about here. It really does a good job of, frankly, not being that thick. So I'm gonna have to remember this cuff trick and use this in the future, because this is a great way to make cuffs out of an otherwise thick fabric and make it not be that thick. And also, while we're at it, I realized that I didn't show you what the finished hem looks like. So you can see the hem of the lining here, and then we flip that up and we just have our bias tape edge that goes along the entire hem here. So it's a nice, again, thin way to treat this because we don't have to double fold, especially in areas like this where it is so thick. And then that is just whip stitched up at the top. This part was done by machine, this seam right there. And even in here, because we've cut away so much, even here it is not that thick. It's still pretty thick, but it's not that thick. And as you can see, this stitch bit is a little bit interesting because this was stitched through all the way to about here, and then at the bottom it was just stitched to the outer part, not the facing, so that we can again treat that as a thinner material. So yeah, that's everything. Let's go to Comic-Con and I will show you the finished look. sorry there wasn't a whole ton of footage of the finished look. I just wasn't able to get that much. Thank you to Stephanie Canada and to Emily for helping me film what I did get. But yeah, not that much time to get that much footage at Comic-Con. I also didn't win anything with this outfit, you know, oh well. I was kind of hoping maybe for needlework. I wasn't expecting any of the bigger awards because I just knew that I wasn't at that level. But yeah, unfortunately, no. But I'll tell you more about Comic-Con in general in next week's video, because next week's video is actually going to be dedicated entirely to my Emerald City Comicon experience, so you will get that then. But the coat is done, yay! And I've actually already worn it at least once at this point as just a regular coat as well. I wore it on opening night of my show, so that was really fun. We have one weekend left. I'm filming this in my stage makeup remnants because we actually just finished our first weekend. If you are interested in seeing Into the Woods and you live locally, I will put the link to the ticket information down below because, again, there is one weekend left of shows, Friday, 2 shows Saturday, and then Sunday. And that is the 15th, 16th, and 17th. So in other words, it's after this video is coming out because I'm filming this like the day before this comes out to patrons. But hopefully you have enjoyed this entire very long project. I know this took me a really long time because of all of the digitizing. Again, this pattern is all now available on my Etsy. All of the pattern pieces come included in that one pattern pack. I will link that down below in the description. Right now the listing is for .pes. If you want a different format, just let me know and I can translate that to a different format. But yeah, that is available. So definitely click the link if that's something that you're interested in, and or let me know if you want a different format. But yeah, that is this project all done. And I'm honestly quite happy with how it came out. Hopefully you guys will like the pattern as well, because that will make it all worth it. Like if you guys are wanting to buy the pattern, otherwise I definitely should have just purchased the pattern in the first place and spent the 50 bucks on it. But at least it was a learning experience for how to digitize embroidery as well. Anyway, if you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week, with sewing vlogs like this out on Tuesdays and sometimes additional content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks or join my YouTube channel memberships right here on YouTube below the video. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Jean and Dan. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!